Roman, what's up, man? Welcome to the Dad Edge.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
How can you say no to a man who has been the foster father for 29 kids? Like, dude, that's remarkable on so many levels. Um, did you ever think when you maybe even started the foster care process that you would have impacted that many kids already?
No, I mean, if you even asked me 5, 6, 7 years before if I was even, considering being a foster parent, I would probably say no. So you really kind of don't know what you're capable of or where life will take you at one point or another.
What was the change?
Yeah, so my wife and I, we got married, we tried to start a family, and then in about 3.5 years, we went through 6 miscarriages. So we found out that my wife had, certain things that would make it harder for her to get pregnant. So we went to infertility treatment, did all that, spent probably like $100,000 out of pocket, and did like the, egg retrievals, the IVF, IUI, and things like that. And yeah, we went through 6 miscarriages, two of which were on Christmas Day. So now Christmas has this weird, obviously, connotation, which is supposed to be kind of 100% positive, now has that like little, I guess, diminishing factor. So when we were going through that, I think at like the fourth or fifth miscarriage, we thought, what other ways can we potentially start a family and help kids out? And at that point, straight adoption was expensive internationally or within the US, like 40, $50,000, which, like I mentioned, we already spent a lot of money on infertility treatment. So we started exploring becoming foster parents. So we went to an orientation and kind of got the ball rolling in terms of like the application process and stuff like that. So it was kind of like a new terrain for us, but we kind of said why not and really ran with it.
I can really relate, man, to the miscarriages. You said not one, but two on Christmas.
Yeah, two separate two separate Christmases. So I don't know like the probability of that. I should potentially win the lottery at some point, but I don't really know how that happens. And it's one of those things where obviously family and stuff. We're over one of them, and the other one we were over, family's house, and the fact that like you still have to kind of keep, I guess, a straight face until you kind of get home. But yeah, one was tough, and it's like every single time, you're kind of more numb and figure the negative versus the positive. So we're doing this again, and now it didn't work 4 times or 5 times. Like, what's the likelihood it won't work again? So kind of starting on negative footing in a way if you experience something traumatic multiple times.
Well, first of all, I'm so sorry about your loss with the miscarriages, especially around the holidays. It's very tough. We went through two ourselves, and one of them was back in 2014, 3 days after Christmas, and it was brutal. It was a brutal miscarriage because we actually knew months leading up to that loss because she was 23 weeks at the time. Our son had trisomy 13. So we knew that he basically wasn't going to live after birth. And even going through the process of, we're Catholic, and plus with our faith beliefs, we don't really believe in abortion. Even if that wasn't necessarily my faith, I don't think I would really be a believer in abortion. For us personally, we just never were grown up that way. But I can tell you, we were really faced with the crossroads of, we knew this child wasn't going to live past, the chances of him going for full term was 60%, 40% miscarriage. And we had decided we were going to go full term because we were really faced with the decision of, like, are we actually being cruel by not terminating the pregnancy? Like, will this kid feel pain, if we go full term? Is it inhumane for us to go full term? And we had to really battle with that one. And through a major decision process and discernment, we decided to go full term. And we unfortunately lost him on December 28th in 2014. And that was very hard. And you're right. I think when we talk about miscarriages, a lot of us think that this is more like the mother goes through her trauma, and the dad is just we're just, I don't want to say we're not even an afterthought, because I think we are, but the spotlight's definitely not on us. And quite frankly, I don't think it necessarily needs to be. But at the same token, men have to go through that grieving period also. And there's very little resources. And plus, even if there were a plethora of resources, there's a part of us as men, we don't really feel like we should go through that grieving process, or should, we think like, hey, I just got to take care of her, which we should. But we also don't really give ourselves permission to grieve. Did you find the same thing?
Yeah, and originally I was born in Ukraine and came over to the US when I was 5. So I think like that kind of upbringing, people often think Eastern Europeans are kind of like more grittier, like harder, like don't show emotion, very kind of stoic. So it's something I had to kind of overcome regardless in terms of, networking, relationships here in the US and with my wife. So it was one of those things. Yeah, I felt, it's not fair, kind of, I felt, because, like, the woman goes through it both emotionally and her body's going through it while you're there. Yes, experiencing kind of the emotions and the feelings, but you can't really relate to the physical part of it. So it was just one of those things where I kind of felt helpless in a way. I wanted to be there for her first and kind of just trying to, I guess, numb my own, emotions to it.
I think that's a huge thing that we do. We numb or avoid, right? It's like, I don't know if you went through this or not, but when my wife and I lost our son back in 2014, my view of it is my feelings on this are completely set aside. I'm just going to take care of her. Because at the time, my older boys, they knew what was going on, so they were a wreck. So I had three people under my roof who were a total mess. So I had to take care of them. And my wife, she kind of caught me with this one, which was really interesting. I remember one day she was breaking down and she's like, well, how are you doing through all this? I'm like, I'm fine. Don't worry about me. Let's worry about you. She's like, no, no, no. Like, how are you? You've got to be upset. I was like, I'll be fine. Like, I'll figure it out. And she's like, I know you're not. She's like, I know you're not. I know you're hurting horribly, but you're trying to be everything to everybody else, our boys and me. And, you've got to grieve through this. And I did the typical dude thing. I'm like, I'll be fine. Don't worry about me. And she even gave me a warning, because it was probably a couple months had passed and she had talked about it with her friends and her mom. And she even went through a little bit of therapy with it and she was feeling better. I wasn't. And my wife sat me down one day and she's like, you haven't given yourself permission to grieve through all this. And I can see it. She's like, this is going to sneak up on you. It's going to sneak up on you if you don't deal with it. And it's not going to be pretty. And I did the typical guy thing. I was like, I'll be fine. I'll seriously, I'll be fine. And dude, I'll never forget it. It was probably 3 or 4 months after the whole thing, and the dust had settled. My kids were better, and she was better, and I was in my garage working on something, just working out in my garage, and I think I was cleaning out the garage, and dude, I just crumbled, lost it. It just all came rushing like to the surface. About like this boy that I knew was going to be born in a few months, and he was no longer going to be born in a few months, and what that was going to be, and the whole process, like the entire journey was just came to the surface, and it was very hard. And I talked about it with a few people. I did go through therapy a little bit, but I found myself literally at a crossroads of like, do I even talk about this out loud? Like, maybe I shouldn't. This isn't something a guy really talks about. So it was like a really confusing time. Have you found that? Just, I mean, I know for you personally, it probably was something maybe you went through, but have you found this with just by talking to other guys as well?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of don't know how to feel. I mean, I still don't know how to feel about it, like reminiscing, but like you said, it's kind of like that builds up other aspects of life, and it's gonna have to come out somehow, either in a positive or negative way. And I feel like a lot of the time that led to situations where I was kind of like short with my wife or just getting angry for no reason, but it was like I didn't know how to deal with it. So I feel like oftentimes like the stuff you're going through as a man, like whatever you're trying to work through in your life, oftentimes if it's not channeled or like you don't properly um, you know, degress or kind of diffuse, you don't have kind of like your positive outlets, it usually starts hurting people closer to you because a lot of the time, like coworkers or people I've networked with or acquaintances, they don't necessarily see it, but for some reason, one way or another, it always like trickles down to like your immediate family. So like, although you don't want to take out like being aggressive or angry or not, I was never violent, but just like my tone, just the stuff I said and stuff like that, and then usually it's like you do or say something you don't regret it in the moment because it's like emotion driven. You don't separate the emotion from the situation. And then when you reflect on it after the fact, it's like, why did I do that? Could I have handled it differently? So there were situations like that. And like you said, I feel like a lot of stuff like that comes out when you're alone and you have time to, think. And
100%.
usually the thoughts are running negative thoughts. So like you were
Yeah.
working in the garage or, no one's home and it just like hits you at once. It's like crazy, like, emotional roller coaster. You kind of don't know how to handle it sometimes.
100%. And it's almost like, I think because we don't talk about it very much as men, and we don't talk about, I mean, to be honest, man, like it sounds kind of crazy, but even in my closest circle of friends, I can tell you out of my guy friends, like who's had miscarriages and who hasn't. I'm talking like the close relationships, right? But like I would say, like more acquaintance level, right? I couldn't tell you. There's no way. I have no idea. But I know that there's an enormous amount of families that are impacted by that, an enormous amount of men. And it's just something we just quite frankly, we really don't talk about. I wanna I wanna just I want to shift gears for a moment here because I really want to give the audience, I want to spotlight the why you're doing this, right? The why you're helping so many foster children. You have your own story of how you were brought up and the lessons that you maybe learned what to do, what not to do. And based on what you're doing today, a lot of that has to do with how you were brought up. So I'd love for you to tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. So I was born in Lviv, Ukraine in 1984, immigrated to the US in 1990, where it was like the leniency of people coming over. The Berlin Wall fell. It was like perestroika and whatever. So like people started coming over. Technically, we came over as religious refugees because we did go to church, believed in God, but under communism, you can't worship. You can like it's basically kind of serve the state mentality, and there's no other God other than like the state, the communist state. So my parents, grandparents, people around me had different privileges taken away. If you talked about something super radical, you kind of disappear. I remember staying in like bread lines for a few hours with my mom and other relatives. So, we came over here, we went through Vienna, Austria, Rome, Italy, came here to a two-bedroom apartment. And I think during that time and kind of still in Eastern Europe, the stigma of domestic violence is not really treated um, that seriously. So it's kind of like a family matter. Like you resolve it yourself. So my dad was abusive to my mom, my aunt, my grandparents. Well, I have a younger brother. When my mom was pregnant with him, he threw her down the stairs. So the doctor said he might be stillborn or there'd be complications. Thank God that none of that happened. But times when I was younger, at like even 5, 6, I would tell myself I don't want to see that kind of thing or be that way when I have kids in my life, either kids, friends, family, or my own kids in one way or another. So I kind of made that pact to myself, and there were situations where it was also like, and I'll try to protect those around me because when I was like 5 and seeing that, I was helpless. There was actually like times where one time I wanted to at 5 years old, get a knife and like stab my dad to protect my mom. So there was like those kind of thoughts in my head of like helplessness. I think that's one reason when I turned 18, I just started aggressively working out to get to a point where like if you ever, did that in my adult life, I can, physically kind of like combat that. But I just try to or made it a point at a young age not to reflect that because oftentimes, you have several siblings in the family. Some people use that as a driving force for change, and some people use that as a crutch or as an excuse. Like my dad was abusive. okay, it's generational. Let me fall into that trap, or alcoholism or drugs, or you got to use that as fuel to, change your behavior. So that was kind of, I guess, the defining factor of my youth of how I, treated people around me in my adult years.
That that's really, really tough, man. And I can relate to that kind of upbringing. I remember like my stepdad, who was a part of my life from the time I was 4 to 10, and he would just beat the snot out of me and my mom. And I remember like even being like 5 years old, and he had my mom pinned down one time, and they were like physically fighting. And I was like ran into the room trying to peel his hands off of her, and I was like beating on his wrist and his hands trying to get her to let go. And it's a it's a crazy thing to be a part of when you're that age. And I think it's also it's a good lesson on what not to do, like you were saying. Um, and there's that trauma, that I think kind of sticks with you. You know, one thing I've noticed about just men in general who have been, and myself included, who have been raised with trauma is it's almost like there's a dark side that you can't quite shake. That's about the best way I can describe it. It's like, and what I mean by that is it's almost like internal, right? No one else maybe sees it or feels it, but it's there. It's always kind of like humming in the background. So, like, for instance, it's even hard for me to kind of talk about, but like I have, my youngest is 7 out of 4 boys, and I'll be putting him to bed at night, give him a hug, kiss him, love on him. And I sit here and I think about like times when I was 7 and my dad would slap me across the face hard, throw me down, throw me over my bed and onto the other side, you know, you know, thrust me into a wall. I'll never forget one time he grabbed me by the neck and shoved me up against the wall when I was 7 and held me there and was choking me. And when I say the dark side, I mean like I look at that little boy at 7 years old, and there's not one part of me that could fathom doing that. Not one. No matter how much he pisses me off or makes me upset, I can never get to that level. And it makes me like grateful in a way, right? That I would never do that. But at the same time, I also feel very jaded and like, what is it in a human being that they get to that point where they do that? I don't know if you have an answer for that or maybe some experience with that.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about it a lot, and I mean, at the kind of primal level, I think a lot of it is impulse control because you see, like everybody incarcerated, if you think about it, had no impulse control. Like, yes, you're walking down the street oftentimes, or you get into some kind of verbal, back and forth. Like you can escalate it, or you can, have the control or be able to separate it and understand kind of consequences. So I think like coming from Eastern Europe, that it wasn't punished by, people didn't call the police about domestic violence, and it wasn't like a crime per se in that kind of Eastern European society. It was more so like, I guess, in a way accepted. So, when you think you have kind of like the autonomy to do something and you're not kind of put in check in terms of kind of like checks and balances or what the consequences will be, then you're more likely to do it. Obviously, like here, it's a little different, but I mean, usually there's something in that person's life because I believe like my dad, went through domestic abuse and so on and so forth. I think, and there's a lot of like cycles that, repeat themselves, and he never, took a stand to break that. I, unfortunately had to do it. I mean, it's part of me, like you said, kind of like a dark thing, but I don't know if I like looking back at it, it was unfortunate, but I don't know if I would change it because that it impacted me in such a positive way in terms of a driver, like negative fuel to fuel something positive.
Yeah, I mean, you took it sounds like what you did was is you took the obviously the negative experience, like I think we both did that. I would venture to say you took it to a whole new level with what you're doing, which is pretty darn amazing. But talk to me about why it's so important to you to impact. I mean, it sounds like perhaps as many kids as it's humanly possible for you. Is that accurate?
Well, it seems like it. I mean, we've had the most at once was five kids under the age of four, which was like really interesting. It's like a starting basketball lineup. We actually have a picture of all of them in little Puma tracksuits, so it looks like they had little warm-up suits for a basketball game. But yeah, we were kind of helping or trying to help as many kids as possible, and along the way, we got the ability to adopt. We would take that opportunity because technically we were are foster to adopt. So if we have a child in our home and the case moves to adoption, we would be the first ones contacted if this is a good fit. If the obviously the child is old enough that they can express that they want to be with us, or look at like bonding evaluations, how the children are with us. So we went through the process, the class time, the all the background checks, all the family studies, and had our home license. And then really we got formally licensed May 31st of 2018. Next day we had two boys with a black trash bag dropped off June 1st, 2018. And it's one of those things which is funny because you have a formal class and they try to make it seem like it's like sunshine and rainbows, like kind of like you go on social media and you see kind of highlight reel of somebody's life, like everything is awesome. But when you get a child dropped off, it was more so like a scared straight thing. Like, you guys figure it out. So it's like you get a child and you have to learn. Like, the child sometimes is a few years old, so they already have been imprinted by other people and taught by other people, either bad or good. You have to kind of figure out who that child is in a short amount of time so you can help them as best as possible. So you know what kind of triggers them from the trauma they experienced or saw. Some of them have, food issues in terms of food hoarding because they were neglected. So you have to kind of figure all that out really quickly. I think we got good at it, and it's super rewarding. A child comes, caseworker drops them off. A child, was taken. They're nonverbal. They haven't even smiled since they've been in the system, and then they come back in a month for like a visit, and the kids are laughing, playing. So I mean, I take pride in kind of create a creating a safe and loving environment for, regardless if the kids were with us for a weekend or a year or 2 years. We try to be a place where they can kind of be a kid and go through kind of the healing process.
Let's talk about the how that you do that. You talk about a safe environment, right? A loving environment. And how many, just out of curiosity, I know 29 kids total. What has been the largest number of kids in your under your roof at the same time?
Yeah, like I said, five kids, and they were all under the age of four.
Okay.
So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that is for sure. Well, okay, let's zoom back out then. So, with your experience with all these children, right, and creating this safe environment on a day-to-day basis, what does that really look like?
Well, I mean, one of the biggest things that people like don't consider is a formal schedule, because the kids are usually coming from chaos. They have no bedtime. They potentially haven't eaten in a day or two, or eat one day and then don't know when their next meal is. So having a schedule is really important to normalize kind of like what's going on, and really set kind of healthy routines. So we've had kids that they come and they just like eat to the point where they like throw up, just like shove food in their mouth, because in their mind they don't know the next time they're eating. So really like figuring out and showing them that, hey, you have breakfast at 9, you're going to eat at school also, and then at 1 you have lunch, 5 you have dinner, regardless if we're going out or not. You're going to take a bath or a shower at night. So really like doing that consistently and drilling it in, it kind of does wonders. That's kind of like the building block of getting to some kind of normalcy and getting to a point of trust, because the kids also have to trust you to a certain point, because they're being taken from their parents. Because regardless if your parents are monsters or not, they're still your parents, still have a bond to them. You still feel a certain way, love and affection, especially at a young age. So showing that we weren't the ones that took them, kind of demonstrating, like sometimes saying your mom or dad is getting better, and while they're getting better, they're with us. You're with us to kind of like stay with us, and we keep you healthy and safe. and love you and, give you anything you need in terms of kind of support while they're getting better. But yeah, like I said, a lot of the time it's just a routine and schedule. And then it's also figuring out if children need additional therapy. That's one like big thing that I've advocated for. There's a lot of situations where there should be therapy in the, foster care process, especially before reunification, and there isn't. And that's kind of like one of the most problematic points because kids are usually going back for overnight visits to the place where the trauma happened. The parents haven't had the kids kind of full time or day in and day out for months and months at a time, usually closer to a year. And sometimes that causes, when the kid is reunified in a few days, a few weeks, they're back in the system. It's happened several times. I've been kind of like yelled at by caseworkers about it. And we know better. We've been doing it for 20 and 30 years. I'm like, just because you do something for extended period of time doesn't mean you're good at it or care about the kids, because usually they're just a case number to get out of your plate and make the state look better in terms of kind of closing cases. So there's situations like that, and I don't want to be like saying I told you so, but we've had kids come back within like 4 or 5 weeks of being reunified because it's exactly how I said it would happen. Because on kind of the totem pole of importance, foster parents are kind of like their word and their experiences are on the bottom when it comes to, making a point or advocating. Like in court, if I came in and said, "Hey, I don't agree with this," nobody's going to take me seriously because, caseworkers and other professionals and judges, apparently know better, but the kids are with us 24/7. We spend the most time with the kids, so we should know what they're going through or see if there's a genuine change from the parent or guardian getting them back. So there's kind of frustrations on that end as well.
Okay. So, I mean, that's a wild story, number one. But number two, the theme of having a schedule, right? What does that equate to? It equates to giving a kid certainty of what's coming next, right? So if they know, like, hey, the meal that I'm giving you, guess what? It's not going to be your last meal. There's lunch and there's going to be dinner at 6 o'clock, right? So you don't have to be in like survival mode, right, for a kid. Because I'm sure a kid in the system, they're so used to, being in survival mode. I need to just take whatever is in front of me and run with it, versus like, okay, like I know at noon I'm going to get lunch and at 6 I'm going to get dinner, and then tonight after that we're going to have playtime, and then after that we're going to have bath time or shower or whatever, and then my bedtime's 9:30. Like really giving a kid, like you said, a schedule gives them that level of certainty. It also, from other podcast guests I've had on here, they talk about safety. It gives them that environment of psychological safety. um, Also, you mentioned in there when you were describing what you do is you set the stage and environment for a kid to be a kid. What does that look like for the kids and you?
Well, that looks like a lot of Disney World time and aquariums and zoos and all kinds of little whatever they're interested in. So really understanding like what interests them. When kids may be into dinosaurs or Legos or another super expensive hobby. But like if they're into dinosaurs and there's something like some kind of exhibit or whatever, we'll try to go with that. I mean, we've been to Disney World several times. We've been to Legoland in Florida and in New York, Six Flags and aquariums and zoos all over the place, and just like random things that they're interested in, like, teaching them about the Bible or whatever. Went to Kentucky to that Noah's Ark exhibit. That's like the full size Noah's Ark, or like some random place in Pennsylvania that has like the biggest locomotive museum because that's what they want to do. So it's a lot of kind of like random things, but seeing the joy that they get out of it, and even having kids that have been reunified that we still maintain a relationship with their parents and them, because ultimately it's up to the parent or guardian if they want to, have us as a resource moving forward and keep in contact, because some don't. But even then, like years after the fact, you still reminisce. Like, remember when we went to this place or that place or another place? So it's kind of a lot of that, a lot of kind of like learning and just investing the time. So, you can be present, but not really be present. But it's one of those things kind of, shutting your phone down, and your computer and just sitting down and on the floor playing with like Legos or whatever they're into. Just dedicated time that they usually don't have, that, show that you value spending time with them also, because oftentimes that's another big thing. There was no male role model or no father to really be there. So the majority of the kids don't even have a father or really knew who their father was. So I kind of took it upon themselves, however long they were with me, that I would be the probably the biggest male role model, from now until close to adulthood, because maybe they'll have a coach or something like that, or a teacher. But in terms of their adolescence, I would, take it upon myself to be the biggest male influence in their lives. And in terms of the amount of time that they spent with us, try to cram in as much as possible in terms of learnings, and just observing kind of like a relationship, or how communication should be between, a husband and a wife, how we should like act, how we should treat other people, and just teach them as many values as possible before they got to a certain point where, a situation may come up when they're in their adolescence or close to adulthood, that may lead them down the wrong path, and maybe I can have the influence within a few months of them spending with us in our home to possibly steer them in the right direction.
Well, you guys are you guys are definitely doing incredible things in the world, man. I mean, this is something that our society, you know, needs so much. Is not only someone who a family who can take in kids who need that love, they need that safety, they need that security, they need that launching pad of a loving family. Um, I would love to know, just if you were to, zoom out from this incredible journey that you and your wife have started. What do you foresee the next 5 or 10 years look like for you guys, as far as continuing on with this journey?
Yeah, so we were able to adopt our first son this past March. We had another foster child in our home that came back and was with us for another year. So he was with us for a total of like 3 years. Then he went back again to home, and then he ended up back in the system after a month. So it's just kind of right now, it's focusing on, our adoption. And New Jersey, where I'm currently living, doesn't have a foster parent bill of rights. Some states do, that give foster parents kind of like more say. So my wife has been involved with other, foster moms and families and legislatures, state senators and stuff like that, to propose a bill and include some things that there's, different protections for foster parents, and our voice could be, heard a little bit more. Because I mean, I've had situations where a caseworker is in my house and basically tells me like, I don't care what you say about me, you're never going to get me fired. So with that kind of mindset, or when I'm like, it's my job to advocate uh for the kid regardless of who's, intending them harm. It's like, you take an oath in the military, enemies foreign or domestic. So oftentimes, like, you're causing this neglect, because sometimes situations where like the kids have a visit and they're allergic to something, or the lactose intolerant, and the caseworker keeps allowing that parent or guardian to give them milk or give them whatever that causes like rashes and them to break out. I'm like, if you keep doing this, I'm gonna take some kind of actions against you. And oftentimes I'm the bad guy because, I raise my voice or I have a certain tone, and then more caseworkers come, which is amusing after the fact, try to roll like deep, like two or three caseworkers instead of one. So I'm like, you're gonna bring two more caseworkers. What is that really intimidating me? Like, regardless of what you say or do, I'm here for the best interest of the child, regardless of, what the consequences for me are. And it's just like a lot of back and forth. So like even in New Jersey, just like a different kind of relationship, where I've had caseworkers also say like, your foster parents, you work for us, which foster parents don't get paid. There's that kind of
Right.
stigma. There is a stipend for the kids' food, clothes, activities, and that's kind of abused sometimes, where, foster parents would take those and not give them to the child. But, we've, like I mentioned, Disney and things of that nature, isn't cheap. So that's not coming from like a stipend. So all of that is out of pocket. But mainly bring about some kind of change in terms of foster care reform. Unfortunately, like I think like 70% of those at one survey that were interviewed that are incarcerated have been in a foster care system at one point or another in their life. So obviously there wasn't a positive impact while they were there for them to end up on the course of action to be locked up and incarcerated. So figuring that out, figuring out how kids can kind of be steered in the right direction, because I've had a lot of kids. There's some of these kids are 2, 3 years old and they've experienced more in their lives that most adults would. So it's also like reflection and kind of being thankful for your life, regardless of how hard it is, because oftentimes we live in a bubble and there's another whole nother way that people live, especially people, lower income, inner city, things of that nature. So that opened up my eyes to those kind of situations where sometimes I'm like dropping off kids because I don't want the caseworker to for a visit in like a known gang area or whatever, like these other things. So there's like a million stories I can tell, but it just like creating a roadmap that's positive, that when a child does get to a situation, like potentially making a decision that will cause them to get incarcerated, something inside of them because of what I instilled steers them in the right direction and can be an example for others.
Got it. Well, again, I think what you're doing is huge, but for foster kids, but I think that there's something deeper here, and this is where I really want to conclude the interview with a really strong message to just fathers and parents in general, because there's something bigger and deeper that's happening with your journey here with raising foster kids, and that is you have to know how to create an environment of psychological safety for a kid really fast, right? And most of us, a lot of us don't even really know what that looks like. I know when I was a father, beginning of my journey, I sure as heck didn't know what that looked like. In fact, I probably did the opposite of creating psychological safety. I was kind of I raised my kids in a way that was sort of similar to how I grew up without the abuse and stuff like that. But I was quick to, discipline and shutting things down and leveraging things that I probably shouldn't have leveraged, like using guilt and shame and that kind of thing, like the levers that we were used growing up with, right? If you would have asked me 10 years ago, hey man, you need to create an environment of psychological safety, I would have been like, what does that even mean? Had no idea. Um, and the other thing too is really providing like this atmosphere of love, and also allowing a kid to be a kid, right? And giving them basically that psychological and physical freedom to be a kid. So there's a bigger message here, even for just dads and parents in general. But if you were to be able to share like these lessons that you've had to learn by parenting the way that you have, and you were to share with our audience, what those lessons would be that have been the most powerful for any man or dad out there, what would they be?
And I think just being honestly present, oftentimes if you're running a business or life gets in the way, but even whatever amount of time you have with your child, like have that time focused directly on them, like no interruptions, no anything, like block that time out, that they're like the only focus, because that really goes a long way. And I think I've taken that kind of approach. I've taken a lot of things away from being a foster parent and applied it to business and business relationships, where it's like putting employees above me. If there's like, if I'm doing a review, I want to like do the review for those employees first that may feel like not appreciated or things of that nature, because it kind of shows that you're prioritizing them. So making them a priority regardless of what you have going on in your life. And like the simplest thing I would say is just be present, regardless of like what your baggage is, what you're experiencing. They're still a child, and they see that and they absorb a lot, especially at a young age. So at a young age, between the age of 1 and 4, I think as much time as you can spend with your child as possible to, build different values and kind of like who they are at the core, in terms of, you giving them your kind of positive traits. So being present at that age, but being as present as possible. And oftentimes you may not live like the family dynamic, you may live in another state, but when you do see them, have that time, devoted to them.
Can you talk to us more about what presence really means? So, I've been doing this work now with men, husbands, and fathers for 8 years, going on 9 now. And those words are kicked around a lot. I want to be more intentional with my kids. I want to be more present with my kids. And those are words, right? And it's also the intention behind those words. But I think from the day to day, we don't know exactly what that looks like. So, um, for instance, we could have a father or a mother, it doesn't really matter. We can have parents that are physically present, but emotionally and mentally totally checked out, right? So they're like, well, I'm around my kids, I'm present with them. We're in the same room, we play together, we do this, we do that. But I think if we were to take a snapshot in real time of like, you want to know what presence is? It's this. It's not this, or this. It's actually this. So if you were able to really dial it in to give us a picture of what you think ideal presence looks like, what would that be?
Yeah, just kind of being honed in. I mean, I think I got it uh, with my wife to begin with before we even started to kind of like focused on building a family. It's like you said, I was in a room with her, but I'm answering emails on my phone or I have my laptop open. It's like you're here but you're not here, you know what I mean? It's like disconnect, like emotionally, and just kind of like guessing the kids. If you're sitting there on your phone and they're playing or they're trying to ask you to do something, it's just like, okay, okay, cool. Like it's just, you're not dialed in. It's just, I don't know. It's just like one of those wavelengths, like just connecting. If you meet someone or, you have a moment with your child, like they're both kind of like on the same plane. And if you're kind of on different planes, you're not going to do that. I think it's just being, just sacrificing and just being there, and knowing some of the things can wait. Material things, accolades, all those things will come and go, but that you're not going to get back that time. So I think me switching over, knowing that time is that precious, and no amount of material things or awards or financial type things or people that may not have my best interests, spending time with them, where that time for that child is so impactful that even when you're gone, they'll have those kind of core memories. So I think it's just being the bigger person, and just they're number one in that time. There's nothing like else. Like it's, I guess in the movies you see sometimes it's like everything is blurred and it's just like and the child and whatever you're doing. So phone off, phone shut off, block out time on your calendar, like busy, do not disturb, close everything, and just be that. I mean, oftentimes when I had we had more than one child in our home, like having one-on-one time. So taking them individually to the park, or whatever their activity is, and just kind of like doing that with them. And it doesn't have to be an all-day thing. It can be an hour, and the appreciation and the memory that's built can last obviously a lifetime.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. I mean, I have four, and one-on-one time is like gold, to them. I've heard this quote before: kids spell Love, especially when they're little. The other thing too is you mentioned in there, shared activities, right? Things that like activities that we do together. My 9-year-old right now, he's really into Legos, like loves Legos. And you can't really be multitasking while you're putting together, Obi-Wan Kenobi's Starship Cruiser, right? So that forces you to like be in that moment and to like be sitting there, side by side, and then put the phone somewhere else, which has been great. Tomorrow night, me and my 15-year-old, we have a date night. We're gonna go get haircuts. We're going to the barber shop and all that stuff. He's gonna get his fade. I'm gonna get my beard trimmed up, and then we're gonna go shoot guns, at the firing range. And then we're gonna go out to dinner. And it's impossible to be distracted when you when you're well, it's not impossible, but it definitely isn't safe if you're firing firearms, and it's you're on your phone. Hey, hang on, let me get this email real quick or do this social media update. But yeah, I think you're right, and I love how you also talk about the you did it. You didn't even do it on purpose, but the extreme nature of dads. It's like, man, if I do a one-on-one date, it's got to be all in for hours, right? And it's like, no, it could actually be an hour. It could like literally be like, hey, let's go grab breakfast for 30 minutes on Monday morning. Me and you, coffee and a muffin, and just hang out, play games if we wanted to, just talk or whatever. And it could be like literally 30 to 45 minutes. And to them, it's amazing. And to us, it's amazing too. But this has been really cool, man. And such a solid reminder from someone who's got just an arsenal of experience in doing this work and being a dad. One other question. I know I said we're kind of coming to the end, but you've got me so curious on so many things. We didn't talk about marriage, and I would love to know. There's a lot of moving pieces in your family, right? And in order to make those moving pieces work effectively, efficiently, where it's not overwhelming or stressful, you have to have a good teammate. You have to have a good marriage. So I'm so curious to know, how do you and your wife keep your marriage on point?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously tough and in terms of like spending time together and things like that. So I think now really trying to make a point of kind of reconnecting and like relearning and kind of rebuilding our relationship because I feel like fostering 29 kids in such a short amount of time and putting all their priorities first, we kind of neglected ourselves in a way. So right now, like I said, we were able to adopt last March, and that's been a blessing. But now, kind of just reconnecting and rebuilding some of the things that we put on the back burner because the kids were the priority. So oftentimes, like, unfortunately, regardless if you have biological kids or you're fostering, you put your own kind of relationship on the back burner, and there might
100%.
be, issues, communications, whatever's going on, and that will linger for the amount of time until you address it. So I
Yeah.
think right now we're really trying to relearn, kind of take the time to figure out like whatever I did wrong, whatever she did wrong, like what our individual kind of triggers are, better understand each other, and really kind of like just go on date nights and stick to like a routine as well. Because oftentimes like, oh yeah, we're gonna do a date night once a week, once a month, and then life happens regardless, potentially kids or financial things or some kind of grief or trauma in the family or a loss, and that gets put on the back burner. So right now, just trying to invest time to get our relationship, I think, to where it's supposed to be. Because like I said, having that many kids and focusing on raising kids, oftentimes you start, you're selfless because you want to be selfless because your kids are important to you, but sacrificing your connection, I guess, in your marriage along the way.
So many times I've seen it, and I'm sure you have too, that where parents will put their marriage on the back burner for the sake of the kids. And I can only imagine like the busyness and the moving parts of your house and everything you guys are going through, that that could easily happen, right? If we're not careful. I'm gonna ask you this question, and I would love to know what your view of it is. I personally have this view that we are husband and wife before we're parents. Let me explain that. I'm not saying that my kids like, hey, I know you're drowning out there in the pool, but mom and dad need a date night. Or I know like you have F's in all your classes, but I'm not going to help you with that because me and mom need to hang out. I'm not talking about any of that kind of stuff. What I am talking about is my wife and I have this belief that we are the walking, talking 3D movie of a functional relationship that our kids either get to watch or they get to see the flip side of, they get to see their mom and dad neglect each other, basically be roommates, not spend any quality time together, not be affectionate with each other, just sort of like coexist, but they're our parents. I think that's a huge miss for people who are, for us who are parents, because we have an incredible opportunity, and you and I, quite frankly, we didn't get it. We have an incredible opportunity to show our kids what a fully functional relationship marriage looks like, or we can show them the opposite of that. And I think what a lot of parents do is we're like, okay, well, she's good or he's good, I don't need to worry about him anymore, I need to worry about these kids. Then we neglect that relationship. Then there's tension in the relationship. then there could be friction. And then that makes it, going back to like, I don't know about you, but one thing that made me feel, you and I talked about this element of safety, right, in the house, like, certainty, right? I can't even tell you, and I couldn't articulate it as a kid, but when I saw my mom go through traumatic events with either a guy she was married to or a guy she was dating, or we had a live-in boyfriend, because we went through all of them. And when they would fight and it was dysfunctional and it was crazy and it was chaotic, I always felt like I was just waiting for something to drop. Like at all times. It was like survival mode, but under my own house. And it had everything to do with like, oh my God, this is like the state that they're in. Like it's crazy, right? So I, I'm interested in your opinion on that, like what it means as far as if you had a message to share with parents of like, dude, you got to take care of your marriage. Or if you're of the belief of like, no, you actually, the kids come first and the marriage just needs to come second. But I'm curious where you stand on that.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I don't think like the kid, I think it's, well, like my progression, I think, is God, then your marriage, then your kids, then your kind of like immediate family, your parents, brothers, sisters, then your friends, and then your career. That's kind of like my breakdown in
100%.
a way, because a lot of people, they'll have like they're going through marriage issues and they'll have a child thinking that'll fix it, and then put all their attention on the child, but they're not addressing kind of like their relationship. So I think if you try to replace your child in terms of level of importance of your marriage, like you said, like they're not going to see a great representation of kind of like the back and forth in the everyday life, how like a wife and a husband should be like affectionate, show attention and stuff like that. So they're essentially, like you said, they're essentially missing out on that upbringing. And like I said, making that kind of maybe you feel alienated in your marriage or not getting the attention or the love you need. And then, you have a child and you feel like you're getting a certain level of love, but it's not the same thing. So you'll always have that void until you fix it. And then, like you said, just simply existing, oftentimes, you're just together for the child, and the child's 18, then you end up getting divorced, and you spend all that time together just living, like you said, like roommates, and not demonstrating to the child or showing the child what a healthy marriage should be.
Yeah. It's interesting. So I put that, so my team actually put a clip on our Instagram where I basically said, and they clipped out this one part. I didn't even know they were going to clip out this one part, but it said this might ruffle some feathers. But if you want to have a successful, if you want to have a successful marriage, then you're married first and a parent second. And I was like, oh, that's kind of, and then I explained it, right? I explained why, and for all the reasons I just explained to you. And that video went viral. I think it got over like 4 million views and like almost 2,000 comments. And some people were, I would say 70% of people were like, absolutely. Like, yeah, it's a huge disservice to your kids if you're not aligned, if you're not a couple, if you're, that makes total sense. And then 30% of the people were like, you know, yeah, my kid will always be my kid, but my wife might not be my wife, for good. And I'm sitting there thinking like, in my mind, I'm like, if you're already thinking that, that could be part of the problem. Because my wife and I, we don't think that way. We're like, hey, it's me and you. For better, for worse, for rich, for poor, in sickness and in health, it is you and I. And we're in this for life, period. Right. And my kids know that. And I spent probably 40% of my childhood at my grandma and grandpa's house that lived a mile away from us. They were married for 50 years. And I'll tell you, man, I loved being there. I didn't know why at the time, but I can tell you why now. And it's because, and I think my grandfather probably did this on purpose. He never said it out loud, he just did it. But he very publicly showed and told my grandmother how much he loved her. Always. Like a guy was 72 years old and he would rub my grandmother's hand just sitting there at the table while they're having coffee and be like, I love you. You're so beautiful. Look at you. Look at you. So beautiful today. Yeah. I mean, even at like 70 years old, she'd get up to get him another cup of coffee and he'd slap her on the butt and be like, what are you doing? And she'd be like, oh, what are you doing to me? And he'd be like, and then he'd pull her on his lap and give her a big kiss on the cheek and be like, I love you. I just love you. And I remember seeing that as a kid and I'm like, oh my God, that's so cool. Like, and I didn't know it at the time, but as a kid being under that house, it provided me with so much certainty of like, man, this is like the place to be. Like people love each other here. Like I know those two, like they're good, which I feel better being around them. So like it made me feel fantastic. And I knew my grandfather, his priority was her. It was me. I mean, it was to an extent, right? But that was his woman. That was his wife. And that was his priority, right? And for me, it was such a beautiful example growing up. My wife will tell you today that I love her the same way. She's like, you love me like your grandfather loved your grandma. I was like, yeah. I was like, I guess I learned by watching, right? Of how impactful that is. And even my boys today, and I'm sure you're the same way with your wife, and maybe your kids say the same, is that my kids are like, you guys make us sick. Like in this, they say it in a joking way. I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, God, you guys like love each other so much. It's like, yeah. And they kind of, I'm like, yeah, we do. I was like, but can you imagine the flip side of this? What if me and mom weren't together? And then you see it and they're like, that would suck, man. Like my older boys will tell you like that would be horrible. I would not want to be a part of that. So, um, as we head out of here today, what's your final, call to action or message to dads out there?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like everyone's going through something, regardless of what kind of trauma or grief or something you've experienced or, finances. One, not taking it out on your child. Like it's one of those things where it's like disciplining, but disciplining out of anger. Like
Yeah.
separate that,
Yeah.
separate your emotion or, your anger from actually disciplining or the time you're spending with your child and not, bring like the burden of your own burdens and troubles and have the child suffer. And you don't know what you're actually capable of. Like I said, if you asked me 10 years ago, would you ever see yourself fostering one child? I'd probably say no, let alone 29 kids are going down that route. So you don't know where life's going to take you. And whatever your relationship with your kids, is, if you're, with your spouse or not, or in a different state, you can still be present. You can still invest the time. And it's like anything, like if you're going to invest the time to be the best marketer or business person, it only makes sense that you have to put as much time to have a healthy relationship with your child and, let them grow up and be impactful as well.
100%, man. I love what you're doing, man. We need more Romans in the world. And it just sounds cool to even say that. We need more Romans in the world. But I want to give you an opportunity here, man. Where can people find you? And by the way, if you're watching us on YouTube, I'm just gonna say this, and I hope it doesn't make you feel awkward, Roman. But it looks like we could be brothers. I'm not gonna lie. Like we both got the dark features, the beard game, the hat. Like we kind of look a little related. I'm not gonna lie.
That, I, we're brothers from another mother.
Right. But yeah, where can guys find you?
Yeah, I mean, I have a podcast as well. The website is digitalsavageexperience.com. Just kind of going through people's journeys and how they got to where they are now. You can find all my socials and stuff on that. Obviously, my last name's a little hard. If you do Google Roman Prokopchuk, I should be the first one globally because that's actually a common Eastern European last name. But you can find me that way also.
Gotcha. Well, guys, not to worry. We're going to have all the links in the show notes. You can just head on over to thedadedge.com/Friday 112 for this particular show. Again, thedadedge.com/Friday one. I'm sorry, I said 122. I meant 112. Sorry. I'll repeat it one more time for you. Thedadedge.com/Friday 112. Roman, thank you so much for coming on today, sharing your message, and thanks for what you're doing in the world, man. We need more. We need more of this.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. Gentlemen, go out, live legendary. Take care.